Some of you may have noticed that there wasn't a video last week, and that's because I didn't make one because I was in America. Then again, with recent developments of YouTube making it harder for subscriptions to actually function like they should, you know, maybe I did make a video. Not entirely sure how that works, but YouTube famously doesn't. Making videos for YouTube is a pretty sweet gig, but Momocon had whale sharks and Suda51, so you never stood much of a chance. It was a good break, but I can have a deal of sympathy for those of you who needed something to watch last Sunday, and especially for those of you who like really terrible segues. It's my favourite type of person. There might be a few wrong ways to make a villain for a video game, but there sure isn't one single correct way to do it properly. That's important since there's a lot of games out there with compelling characters who've taken the mantle of antagonist, and it is assuring that you can find success even if you do get creative. If you want your villain to have a relatable goal that invokes a great deal of sympathy from the player, then you can do that. Bit of a weird frame of mind to be in, but who knows? Maybe you'll learn something about yourself on the way. Something about having tolerance for someone who commits atrocities and kills indiscriminately? Yeah, that seems like a good life lesson. So my primary concern at this point in time is that sympathy might not be the most accurate word to be using for some of these villains. I guess everything works out fine as long as you consider sympathy as a wide spectrum that can be applied to some actions, if not all. I feel like this is an important distinction to make, otherwise we start sliding down the heavily lubed up slope of condoning the slaughtering of innocents because of a somewhat tragic backstory. Just know that I have an understanding of why a villain did some things, but not everything. That's before we start questioning if they're a villain or not. There's a lot of games out there where it's fairly obvious early on who the bad guy is because the game is trying really hard to establish a hero-villain dynamic from the start. But more compelling narratives do more to hide true intentions and reveal motives slowly, because if you do that second one, you're likely to be brought along for the ride. Doki-Doki Literature Club doesn't immediately seem like the kind of game that could ever have someone who functions like a villain, since A, this game is supposed to be a dating sim. Maybe the antagonist in dating sims is that part of your self-conscious that doesn't want to waste time making friends and would much rather die sad and alone. I doubt that you missed the memo, but Doki-Doki Literature Club is a few steps removed from a standard dating sim, since choices are rare, poetry is given center stage, and gruesome deaths are everywhere! I came here to make friends and write some poetry, and now look what's happened. Ah, dicks. The only characters who don't graphically bite the dust are the playable character and Monica, who reveals in this game's final act that she's a bit different. Monica achieved sentience in the game of Doki-Doki Literature Club before you even got there and became disillusioned with all of her friends being simplistic lines of code, killing them off one by one in an attempt to connect with the only real character in the game, you, the sack of meat behind the keyboard. This is where I'd like to refer back to what I'm calling the sympathy spectrum, since it's evident that Monica is lonely and a little unhinged at the prospect of her own existence as a character in a video game, which is the kind of Matrix-esque simulation existential crisis that I think we'd all struggle with, but she also forced two girls to commit suicide and just straight up deleted another, which we know for a fact hurts quite a lot given what ends up happening to Monica. So she's a psychopath who manipulates everyone around her and slaughters them when they stop being useful, but you still feel sorry for her. Really does test the limits of empathy. With the more classic breed of video game villain, you tend to see a reluctance to develop them beyond your standard mustache-twirling bad guy. And this is perfectly understandable, since very few retro games saw the villain as anything other than a quest that needed conquering and spent more effort towards expanding the gameplay than making the narrative more elaborate. Then again, some of these franchises have kept the fires burning for decades and have, in recent times, shifted their attention towards making the antagonists a bit more interesting than not very. I'm not saying that characters like Bowser need more depth to them, but I did like it when they made Ganondorf a hell of a lot more interesting. There's a line at the end of The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword once you've beaten the final boss where Demise sets up Skyward Sword as the entry point in the Zelda timeline by cursing Link and Zelda's ancestors to be pursued throughout history by an embodiment of Demise's hatred, which is obviously the many forms that Ganon has taken in the last 30 or so years. However, the problem with this is that Ganondorf's motivation reverts to more of a primal instinct than anything interesting. Which is particularly irritating since Wind Waker actually did some fucking work in this department. This version of Ganondorf isn't this distant, faceless evil that awaits you at the end of the game, and instead gives a believable reason as to why he wants to assemble the Triforce. The royal family are dicks, who lorded over the idyllic Hyrule from their fancy castle, but allow Ganondorf's people, the Gerudo, to suffer in a baking hot desert. His aim, at least with relation to the events prior to Wind Waker that saw Hyrule flooded, were to put his people on top and give them a better way of life. Of course, he went about this in a way that is a little harder to defend, but you can really tell in this game that Ganon is going through the motions here, and is simply looking for a way around a problem rather than a kingdom to rule over, because why not? Can't say we've had a version of Ganondorf this interesting before or since. Clearly Nintendo have been holding out on us. If you scratch beneath the surface a little bit, there's a fascinating dynamic between Ganon and the Gerudo, because older games like Ocarina of Time has already established that a large part of the Gerudo are ashamed of what Ganon has become, but his actions are based off noble and selfless ideals. He's got the right idea, but the complete wrong execution. Maybe being a descendant of Demise has blinded him to all other options, but, stab things a lot. Skyward Sword ain't so bad. I think I really enjoy villain hierarchies. It's probably not something that you wonder about on a regular basis, but some games like to ease the player into a large world full of danger by gradually feeding you threats of increasing power. On a gameplay level, these are enemies that slowly ask you to do more to defeat them, but when thinking about story, this is realized by moving the spotlight onto more and more dangerous bad guys as you make progress. It works really well in that Japanese type of episodic video game where your adventure has been divided into digestible chunks. I liked it when Capcom did this with Okami, but I liked it even more when Monolith did the same with the first Xenoblade Chronicles. Because not every villain is born equal, or even a villain. When you start having more than one villain in your lineup, you gotta start having some more variety in there. So you can have different personalities work towards the same end goal, or how people react to the same problem and become villains because of it. Xenoblade Chronicles has a lot of typically villainous bad guys who just want power or revenge or just mad chaos or something. But that's where Egil is interesting, because with him, it's not quite that simple. I'd like to emphasize the fact that the only reason why Egil stands out so much is because he's sharing a campaign with a collection of slightly more maniacal bad guys who want to see the world burn. Egil has some similarly murderous tendencies, but they only come about because some god possessed his friend, and now he wants to kill everyone who sides with said psychotic deity, which, inadvertently, includes the main characters. So there are odds from the start, which leads to some pretty awesome scenes about blades not cutting deep enough, but things start getting interesting once Shulk is able to convince Egil that they both just want peace for their respective worlds. Egil isn't some crazed lunatic, he's simply looking for things to return how they were. Maybe minus the other guy. That is until some betrayal shenanigans happen where Shulk is shot in the back, and Psycho Godman Zanza is born, which gives Egil an opponent to fight who is way stronger than him. Inevitably, Egil dies to Zanza, but not before helping the main characters escape the now obliterated Mechonis. In a game that runs a lot with a very binary form of good versus evil between two equally strong sides, Egil represents the transitional period where both sides come together to take down a far more dangerous villain. That is one way of writing an engaging antagonist. Make them self-aware and flawed so they can undergo realizations at their own pace should the need arise. I remember when that other Xenoblade game started using the villain in the last 15 minutes. Wasn't that a pile of shit? there's a danger of there being a real disconnect between the protagonist and their antagonist. If you want to tell a really gripping story that poses difficult questions and puts the main hero in awkward positions, then you can do a lot worse than make the villain related to the main character in some way. You know, Bowser is just a guy who steals Mario's princess every other game, and there's really nothing tying those two characters together other than the events of each game they star in. Maybe Bowser and Mario play golf on weekends and Mario's really into this whole kidnapping spiel. It's hard to tell from the games though. This is something that Fire Emblem has looked into from time to time through the use of family members getting involved in the conflict, or having your companions become corrupted, and it has had a profound effect on some of these stories. You're not just fighting a random dragon at the end, you're fighting someone who matters. Fire Emblem Sacred Stones was in fact the first game in the franchise I put some serious time into, and this is largely down to the fact that the story being told here is significantly more complex than I expected it to be. Main bad guy Leon isn't actually that much of a bad guy at all, since he was childhood friends with Ephraim and his sister Erika, but grew apart from them due to poor health, an unrequited love for Erika, and general jealousy of Ephraim. A vision of the future told Leon that an earthquake is due to destroy most of the world, and something must be done to prevent this. Probably shouldn't be resurrecting an ancient evil demon god, but when you're desperate, you'll cling to whatever rope the world offers. Leon's journey to bring back Famortis leads to him being possessed and slowly molded into this more by-the-numbers villain. But there's still that tragic element of Erika and Ephraim being constantly confronted by a corrupted version of someone they used to care for. Actually, come to think about it, Leon has absolutely nothing go his way throughout Sacred Stones. He doesn't become a lot stronger, he doesn't get with Erika, he doesn't kick the crap out of Ephraim, he doesn't even stop the earthquake, and his death in the arms of his friends proves to be the final catalyst of Famortis' resurrection. Honestly can't think of too many characters, let alone villains, that end up being shafted this hard by the game they're in. People get dicked over a lot in this franchise, but holy shit, guys. Ease up on the depressing shit every once in a while. Looking back over this video, there's an interesting amount of Nintendo on here. Trust me, I don't do this deliberately, but I also don't look back over the games I've chosen and think, you know, I should probably swap out these Nintendo games with something less Nintendo-y. I can't help it if Nintendo like taking risks that often do fairly well for them, but sometimes spectacularly blow up in their faces. At the risk of sounding even a little controversial, I would describe Super Paper Mario as a dice roll that didn't really work in Nintendo's favor. It changed a lot about the Paper Mario formula, and it ended up being just the start of a period of intense experimentation for a side franchise that was doing just fine. That doesn't mean it was a bad game though. If just for the fact that Nintendo went in hard with the story for this quirky Mario RPG. Previous Paper Mario games delved a little deeper due to it being part of a genre that practically requires you to do so, but this time around, things got a little darker. You know, the previous game had some evil being that the bad guys were trying to bring back, but here, characters die, worlds get annihilated, and the main villain is about as tragic as he could be. When you're first introduced to Count Bleck, he comes across as a classic hammy villain rife with catchphrases and dress sense so wacky that he has a fucking monocle. I don't know what the hell's going on, but I'm so damn invested right now. If you want to gradually reveal to me that behind this goofy facade lies a broken man who lost the love of his life and is now hell-bent on acting on his nihilism to destroy all worlds, I guess that's okay. I just like the monocle a lot. The subtext on display here is kinda ridiculous, really. Count Bleck never acts like the usual Mario villain who lusts for power and control, and instead solemnly goes about destroying everything in his path since he has lost all hope that his love interest is still alive. Turns out she is, and has been accompanying Mario throughout the whole journey in an altered form. And from a position of quiet anger, it's amazing how quickly Count Bleck retreats once he has a bit of hope in his life again. Once the two of them reconnect, Bleck actively wills Mario and friends to defeat him, which may have worked, but then Dimentio does some creepy bullshit with Luigi and speeds things up a bit, forcing Count Bleck and Tippy, the love of his life, to wed each other to charge up some magical hearts and reverse all the bad stuff, seemingly erasing the pair of them from existence unless you read too much into this image at the end of the credits. I suppose Mario defeated Dimentio in the end, but it was Count Bleck who started and thwarted his own evil plan, all while wearing just the best monocle. I can show sympathy to that, no questions asked. This has been RabbidLuigi, and there is no greater indication that the Paper Mario spin-off series lost its way after Super Paper Mario than the waning quality of the stories. You know, the newer games crack a few jokes and, you know, some decent writing in there somewhere, but they lost a lot of soul and thematic drive that is so evident in Super Paper Mario. I pray for a day when one of these games has the same kind of villain that can bookend a story as Count Bleck. I wouldn't even consider that a risk, because it's worked before. If you can do that, I think you should probably do that. Have you got an idea that you'd like me to turn into a countdown? Let me know in a comment down below, and make sure you check out my Twitter, where I'll be turning the best submissions into a poll where you can then decide the best topic. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.